For decades, the defense industry has been this walled-off garden, dominated by just a handful of massive companies. But now, there's a new player in town, led by a genuine tech maverick, and they're trying to completely rewrite the rulebook for how America builds its arsenal. So today, we're going to dive deep into the story of Anduril and its incredibly ambitious and, yeah, pretty controversial plan to build the military of the future. And this is the guy behind it all, Palmer Luckey. This one quote, it cuts right to the absolute heart of his philosophy. It's a really bold statement, right? It frames this radical shift in foreign policy, and it's the engine driving his multi-billion-dollar company, Anduril. So who exactly is the guy trying to turn the U.S. into the world's gun store? Well, for starters, he is not your typical defense executive. This is an industry known for gray suits and decades of tradition. Palmer Luckey? He's a 32-year-old billionaire who's way more likely to show up in a Hawaiian shirt and flip-flops. This is a classic Silicon Valley disruptor. He's the guy who founded the VR company Oculus Rift, sold it to Facebook for a fortune, and then turned his attention to one of the most locked-down industries on the planet. And he looked at it and thought, you know what? This system is totally broken. And that broken system is really the core of Anduril's whole origin story. See, this isn't just about building cool new weapons. It's about completely changing how they're built, how they're funded, and how they're sold to the government. Luckey's diagnosis was pretty simple. The old way of doing things is way too slow, it's way too expensive, and it basically rewards all the wrong behavior. Okay, so for the last 40 years or so, the defense world has run on something called a cost-plus contract. As you can see here, the incentives were just totally backward. The government would pay a company for all of its costs, plus a guaranteed profit on top. So what does that mean? It means if a project took longer or went way over budget, the company actually made more money. Yeah. Anduril just flips this whole model on its head. They act like a product company, kind of like Apple. They invest their own money to develop a working prototype first. This moves all the financial risk from you, the taxpayer, onto the company. Now, of course, this is a huge gamble. If Anduril builds something the Pentagon decides it doesn't want, well, they eat that entire loss. So what's the result of this new model? Well, look at this number, 556 days. That's how long it took Anduril to get its autonomous fighter jet, the Fury, from a signed contract to its very first flight. That is the fastest development of its kind since the Korean War. They were competing against giants like Boeing and Lockheed Martin, and they won, proving that their model can turn ideas into actual flying hardware at speeds that are just unheard of in this industry. That incredible speed really proves their business model works. But what exactly are they building with it? Well, this is where things start to feel like they're straight out of a sci-fi movie. They're creating an entire ecosystem of AI-powered autonomous weapons, all designed to work together, and it paints a pretty wild picture of 21st century warfare. So their arsenal has Fury, that AI fighter we just talked about, and this thing called Roadrunner, which is a reusable jet-powered interceptor. But the real magic, the secret sauce, isn't in any one piece of hardware. It's the software that ties everything together, Lattice OS. Think of it as the AI brain, a digital commander that lets swarms of these drones coordinate, share information, and carry out missions like a single unified team. And just like your phone gets updates overnight, Anduril can push new software and new capabilities to its entire fleet, instantly, making them constantly adaptable on the battlefield. Now for a really cool little tangent. A few years back, Anduril actually developed a working optical camouflage system for its Ghost drone. We're talking about a real-life invisibility cloak. So here's how it works. The drone's cameras look at the sky behind it, and then a projection system displays that exact image right onto its own body, making it just blend in perfectly with the background. But here's the reality check. While that is an incredible trick, it's not actually all that useful against a modern military. Sure, it can fool the human eye, but it's really easy to spot with the kind of infrared or radar systems that adversaries like China and Russia use. So it was a brilliant solution to a problem that doesn't really exist on today's battlefield, which is why it's not a standard feature. And that little detour actually brings us back to the bigger picture. The technology is amazing, but it all serves a much larger strategic vision. A vision to fundamentally change America's role in global conflicts. This is the why behind everything that Anduril does. At the core of all this is what you might call the prickly Porcupine Doctrine. And the logic is super simple. Nobody wants to mess with a porcupine. The idea is that by arming our allies with thousands of these advanced, autonomous, defensive weapons, the cost of trying to invade them becomes so painfully high that potential attackers just decide it's not worth the trouble. You see, for decades, the main model has been the world police. When an ally is threatened, America sends its own men and women, our sons and daughters, to fight and potentially die on foreign soil. And that is incredibly costly. both in dollars and, more importantly, in human lives. The World Gun Store model completely flips the script. Instead of sending soldiers, America sends shipping containers packed with smart weapons. Our allies get the tools they need to defend their own sovereignty, and it lets the U.S. project power and support democracies without putting American lives on the front line. Palmer Luckey basically argues that deterrence only works if the threat is actually credible. In his view, diplomacy and sternly worded letters are pretty meaningless without the backing of real, overwhelming force. He believes that the peace and stability we often take for granted only exist because there's a credible threat of violence behind it. Of course, this whole vision immediately slams into a major ethical wall: the idea of killer robots. A lot of people are, understandably, deeply uncomfortable with autonomous weapons making life or death decisions. But Luckey and Anduril, they have a pretty powerful counterargument. And this really is the central question, isn't it? Is it morally acceptable for an AI to select and engage a target without direct, moment-to-moment human control? For many people, that is a line that should absolutely never be crossed. But the way Luckey frames it, the choice is different. He argues that the real choice isn't between smart weapons and peace, it's between smart weapons and dumb ones. A landmine, for example, is a classic dumb weapon. It is completely indiscriminate. It will blow up a school bus just as easily as it will blow up a tank. An AI-powered drone, on the other hand, can be programmed to identify very specific targets, which could, in theory, make warfare less dangerous for civilians. But, and this is a big but, this view is far from being universally accepted. The opposition is significant, and it's vocal. The Secretary General of the United Nations, for instance, has called lethal autonomous weapons politically unacceptable and morally repugnant, and that reflects a big global push to ban them entirely. And that's where this all leaves us. Anduril's big bet, their thesis, is that a world armed with smarter, deadlier, and more autonomous weapons is ultimately a safer world, one where deterrence actually works and wars are less likely to even start. But it forces all of us to confront a really unsettling question. Is selling more guns, even incredibly smart ones, truly the best path to peace?